Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the ANP Conference. This is our day 2. This is where we're on the ground, where the rubber meets the road, where we want your conversation. We want you included in this. This is a rare opportunity to be able to speak with the experts, to share your ideas, to make this a creative process. So with that, you already know who she is. You know that she covers the ground in our financial world, in our future, in how to change what's happening, how to know it not just from the financial end of it, the governmental end of it, but I know you are connected in the dimensional.
I don't want to know how to change it. I want to know how we can navigate it.
Yeah. Yes. We're in for a ride.
We're riding. We're surfing. We're good.
Yes. And to surf that with balance and connection.
Now, one of the things, I can surf it better if I have coffee. Is there a way somebody can put that up so I can have my coffee? I'm sorry, it's Sunday morning and I'm not,
So if someone can bring coffee,
No, I have the coffee.
Oh, you have
I just
it?
need
Okay.
this thing so I don't put it on the floor.
So I invite you to be part of the conversation, engage it. This is a rare opportunity. So
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's
welcome-
wonderful to see you all this morning. I can't believe you came out at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Let's hear a round of applause for you. Thank you so much. And I'm very grateful for the chance to talk to you. I've gotten to the point where the idea of lecturing to somebody for 45 minutes is just very, because I love to hear what you think, and I much prefer an interactive dialogue. It was great that Tom and George were here from coast to coast, because I love doing live talk on coast to coast, and the callers call in. And you learn so much. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so what I would love to do is start off by going around the room. We have a microphone. So there's a white X here. You can stand there, or we have a microphone that will walk around the room and come to you. And I would love to hear what you would like to get out of this workshop, if you're willing to share it.
I've heard you talk a lot about entrainment, and I think the woman next to me yesterday said, "Can you tell me exactly what entrainment is?" And I said to her, "Well, I think it's mind control through hypnosis and subliminal messaging." But she goes, "Well, what exactly?" So
that's a question. Okay, let me get a. I want to know what everybody wants, and then we'll go in. But that's an excellent question.
Hello, Catherine. I was wanting to know if you were familiar with the Wurgles economy that I learned about through the TEDx talk at Black Rock City, and apparently it was an alternative currency that was
Keep talking.
complementary.
I'm just going to get a pad of paper. Yeah?
Okay. It was invented in Austria during the Depression years, and apparently it created a lot of circulating currency in the local economy, and it was a non-debt-based currency where there was an expiration on it, so it was more like fruit. Right. And if you didn't spend the currency within a certain time, it would go down. The value would go down, and you could restore the value by paying a tax, and the tax became the basis of the government funding.
Okay.
Okay. So.
What other questions?
Hi, my name is Margaret. I would like to know how to increase our privacy, like everyday practical tips, what to do, what not to do. Okay?
Right.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Heather, and I'm interested in what you think about a global currency reset.
Okay. We've been in the middle of one for 10 years. This is what it feels like.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to know how you felt about the Fed, if you feel like if banks are going to crash in the near future, or if everything,
Okay.
Thank you. Hi. Is the stock market going to crash next week?
Correction or crash?
Well, So, well, seriously, I'm one of those people who sort of live and don't live by the status of my 401k.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know the first thing about stocks.
Uh-huh.
And I'd like to hear your ideas about it.
Okay.
Thanks.
A few months ago, the Rockefeller Foundation announced they were selling off some of their oil. Last week, the Saudis said they were thinking about putting out an IPO on part of Aramco. Are we closer than we think to free energy? These are the insiders. They're thinking about selling.
Okay.
Two quick ones. One is the illegal drug trade, and that's rolling everything, and the other is the
Now
role
say that again. What
illegal
about
drug trade, the drug cartels, their role in everything that's going on.
Okay.
And the second is the Illuminati or the Satanic and Luciferian groups, if you have any hit on their role in all the craziness going on.
Okay.
Hi, adding on to some other questions, what the most viable alternative currencies are, and how we can protect ourselves against the coming global controlled currency.
Okay.
I'd like to know if you see a place for combining time banking with some kind of either the current currency or some kind of an alternative currency.
Okay.
Hi. How can we protect ourselves from financial harvesting?
Right.
Hi, I'm curious about debt forgiveness and how that might affect the economy, the global economy.
Okay.
I need a general overview from the beginning to the end.
Always was and always will be world without end. Okay, let's take two more, and then I'll.
Your thoughts on?
I think I've got a sense of what you want.
Your thoughts on gold and silver?
Oh yeah, no, I always have thousands of thoughts on gold and silver.
Catherine, I'm wondering your opinion on the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, Bill Gates et al., and what you see their role to be, whether it's interference or truly trying to push this agenda forward for new energy. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let me.
I have one more.
One more. One more.
Is this on? I wanted to ask if you know anything about NASARA, the National Economic Security and Reformation Act, if that's real and what you think about it.
Okay. Okay, so let's dive in. What you want to know is, what's the current model on planet Earth, and where's it going? You know, what's the new model going to be? When's it going to happen? How's it going to happen? And then how do I navigate that? And what's important to understand is the answer to all those questions is we don't know. But that doesn't mean that we can't frame the uncertainty and figure out ways to navigate. So I'm going to start with entrainment because the most important thing you need. Here's what's really funny. If you look at the global balancing of the global rebalancing of the economy, we're going from what's called a unipolar world to a multipolar world. Okay? Can you guys? You're not running? Can the guys running the audio turn up the audio? Now can you hear? Okay. So we're going from, thank you very much. So if you can't hear, please wave. If we're going from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, and let me explain what that means. When I was on Wall Street, I'd walk into the board meeting with the banking partners would all have a meeting, all the partners, and we'd gather in the boardroom, you know, the big boardroom, and the chairman would come in and he would say, let me tell you what's going to happen this year. Okay? And then that's sort of what would unfold, but it would unfold very organically, and we were never sure exactly as the timing. But there was a plan, and as long as you followed the plan, you had air cover, you know, and communication from the top about how to navigate that, because it was a unipolar world. But in a multipolar world, the guys who are giving you the inside tip are no longer in control. So things become a lot more out of control and unpredictable. So let me give you an example. Last year, as oil was cratering, you know, we were getting the emails from the knowledgeable inside sources, you know, we're going to bottom out at about 40 or 45, and it'll head back up to 60 by the end of the year. Well, good luck with that. You know, and so these were sources that have always been highly reliable. They got completely surprised. And some of the biggest commodity producers in the world got completely surprised. And it was a perfect example of a multipolar world. They didn't know, okay? What that means is when we're managing our lives, so whether it's I'm managing my time and where I put my time, or I'm managing my assets and where I put my assets, I'm managing my business and where I put my business, the variability of what can happen is far greater, and the information we need to navigate it is far less, okay? And that's the reality. Now, the way I deal with my business planning and the way I deal with my investment strategies is with scenario design. Does anybody here know what scenario design is? Scenario design. Scenario design says, I don't know what's going to happen. Now, I spend a huge amount of time doing radio shows and having fights with people who are very committed to one picture of what's going to happen. You know, so does anybody here watch Greg Hunter? Does anybody watch me fight with Greg? I love fighting with Greg Hunter. For a year and a half, he kept saying the dollar's going to collapse. And I said, no, it's going to go up. And he says, that's impossible. Everybody who comes on my show says the dollar's going to collapse. You have to be wrong. And I said, I'm not wrong. The dollar's going to go up. You know, and so we were playing a game of prophecy, okay? There's no way anyone could know for sure. You know, the reasons I believe the dollar was probably going up had to do a lot more with technical analysis than fundamental analysis, but the reality is you don't want to get locked into one picture of the future other than your picture of your successful life, okay? And you need to be able to rock and roll, because even the experts, a highly knowledgeable financial person, can be very committed to thinking it's going to go this way, and in a multipolar world, it's going to surprise. When you get, you know, we're going to a world where we're going to have 8 or 9 billion people on smartphones talking to each other, and what they're going to invent together is going to be a lot more out of control than we're going to be able to predict, okay? And that's part of what you saw happen with a lot of people get surprised on oil, okay? So the big question when you're going from a unipolar world to a multipolar world is, when does the dollar stop being the reserve currency, okay? And when does the dollar stop being the reserve currency? Because the U.S. Higher volume?
May I suggest that we turn it down and get them to turn it down, and then there'll be less interference?
Ah, how do we do that? Can we? Okay, how many people want me to get the microphone turned up louder? That's right, it's a multipolar world. To my mouth. Okay, I'll try that. Is that okay? There we go. I'm not famous for being quiet, so this is an unusual circumstance. Okay, so the dollar, the U.S. dollar is on a long-term decline in terms of market share. And what is happening globally is you're watching countries all around the world start to build redundant payment systems. So let's start with what I was talking about yesterday. We got the GPS satellite systems up in the mid-90s, and that's when we started to rebalance the global economy. Because remember what I said, investment only flows where you can monitor and enforce, okay? A lot of this has to do with space. And it wasn't until 2011 that the second country got their GPS global satellite systems up, and now Europe has theirs coming online in 2016. So part of watching that is part of watching a lot of redundant payment systems come up. Now, what did the US dollar do in the meantime? The US dollar printed lots of dollars and lent them to everybody cheap, so that when this happened, they would have a leash on the whole world, okay? What is happening right now is commodity prices are falling. We're watching the dollar rise, okay, in price, And interest rates, the Fed is now beginning to ratchet up interest rates. And what's that doing? It's putting the whole world in a bear trap. Do you see what I mean? Which is why I thought the dollar would rise. Is that making sense to you? Okay, so I lend everybody dollars, and then their revenues go down, and they have to pay dollars back, and I've got them over a barrel, okay? Which is essentially what is happening. But that game is only good for so long. All these countries are creating all sorts of different mechanisms to trade and build the infrastructure they need to go around the dollar. So it's coming. It's also coming for another reason. Fossil fuel is a legacy technology, as we all know. Thank you to Global BEM and Joel for making sure we know that. And it's only, the dollar has been on an oil standard, not a gold standard, an oil standard. So it's only a matter of time. If you want to understand what's happening to the dollar, I would recommend one article. In the annual wrap-up, our #1 story of the year was rising dollar, falling commodities, and I put a series of links in it. There was an excellent article from The Economist called Dangerous and Dominant last year. They did a whole spread on the decline of the dollar, and it's a very good, balanced perspective of where we are. Now, I will tell you what I believe the #1 most important issue as to the speed of that transition, and what the U.S. part is in the evolution and what comes next is going to be space weaponry. Okay? Space weaponry. The current investment model, and we'll talk, I thank you for that question, we'll talk about new financial models. The current investment model on planet Earth is the central banking warfare model, okay? It's been operating for 500 years. You know how important a model is when you run your business on a model. Sorry, thank you. When you run your business on a model and that model has to change, it's very cumbersome. So imagine we have an entire planet that's been on an investment model for 500 years. So changing that is a very deep change. So, oh, this is fun. So here's how the central banking warfare model works. You have the central banks print money, right? And then the Navy and the military make sure everybody exchanges that money for natural resources and other things. Okay, now, imagine if you could print money off your computer and go down the road and buy everything you needed with that money, and they had to sell it to you. Why would they sell it to you for something you just printed off your computer? Why would they do that? Because you have a gun and they don't. I mean, that's grossly oversimplified, but that's how it works. So the critical issue for many, many centuries, the key to the central banking warfare force was who controls the sea lanes. So it was the British Navy, then it was the United States Navy. You can't trade. At the end of World War II, what we said is, here's what we're going to do. The U.S. Navy will protect the sea lanes, and everybody can trade. We're going to open the U.S. market up to both legal and illegal commodities. And so, you know, the U.S. consumer is the big bonanza on the block. Everybody trade, and we build a global economy that way. But our power was we controlled the sea lanes. Okay, you know, first it was the British Navy, then it was the U.S. Navy controlling the sea lanes, okay? But then space happened, and satellites happened. And so that's why I say the orbital platform is the sea lanes of the 21st century. And so part of this is a competition to build the sea lanes in the sky, because more and more, as we digitize, more and more the global economy is going through the sky, okay? So you have a system run by force. We know that we've spent trillions of dollars down the black budget. We know it's created all sorts of amazing weaponry. We had Ben Rich, the head of the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, say that we have, you know, amazing advanced technology that is locked up in the black budget projects. It's very hard to get information about what's really there. So my guess, and this is a guess, is that the U.S. has the dominant position in space weaponry. It's one of the reasons you're seeing so much tension with the Russians, because the Russians have a lot of legacy ability and technology in space, and they're coming on strong, both with the satellite systems, and they're the #2 exporter of weaponry behind the United States. And so one of the reasons that I have sort of been, I've had a lot more expectation that the dollar drop would take longer and be slower than many of my colleagues. And the reason is because of my assessment of the technologies of control, including entrainment, okay? Because if you look, I went through, does everybody know what I did in the 90s? You know, who here has seen Enemy of the State? Okay, so I played Will Smith in real life. I had a squabble with the United States government that involved very immersive physical harassment. I had 18 tracks of litigation, 12 tracks of litigation, 18 audits and investigations, physical harassment, smear campaign. And what I was able to do was watch how they could manipulate every person in my life. It was phenomenal. You have to see the power. I had a fantastic chief financial officer. We had expected to grow, and so we really hired above our pay grade and brought in a guy who was fantastic. And we had set the system up so all the cash flows, we published monthly financial statements on the company intranet, so everybody saw the money. Every check was signed by 2 people, none of which were me. I was the controlling shareholder, but I didn't sign any checks. And he signed every check, and he had complete control of the money. And one day he came in and he said, you know, I woke up this morning and I said, maybe she is laundering money, because the media and the press is so amazing. And he said, you know, maybe she is, because this couldn't be happening unless she really was. And then I realized, wait a minute, if she's laundering money, I'm doing it because I control the money and I know where every dime is and I sign every check, so I know I'm not laundering money, so I don't know how she could be laundering money. But he said to me, how could it be that crazy that I would think that you were laundering money when you're clearly not, because I'm not laundering it for you? It was very funny. So, so the control technology is unbelievably powerful, and I think the most depressing thing I deal with is watching people be manipulated by it and not know. I have I have a Solari report on the Solari Report that I did with a wonderful scientist named Adam Trombley, who had taught me a lot. I'm not a scientist, he's a scientist, and he had sat down and taught me a lot about the sort of the mechanics and the physics and the science of how entrainment technology and subliminal programming works. I don't, it goes in one ear, out the other, so don't ask me to explain it to you, but on that Solari report, you can read all about it. I do tell the story of how I've seen it used in financial situations, because occasionally I would have a client come to me and they were adamant that they wanted to invest in an investment which had a 100% chance of losing all their money. But they were totally clear that they had to do it, and it was for heartfelt reasons. And I realized, it was I've had it used on the phone during the litigation. I had it used on me, but I've seen it, with people and their money, and it's very scary to watch. So I had an understanding of the extraordinary ability to use what I call relational database, artificial intelligence, to manipulate people. So have you ever had the experience where you say, or you email someone and you say, I have a headache, or on the phone you say, I have a headache, and suddenly within 3 minutes you're getting an email marketing aspirin? Okay. So that's not because somebody at the CIA is listening to you, that's because there is, everything is going into the fiber, and there are software programs, artificial intelligence, that is matching you up. So we used to see in my community, it was quite amazing, somebody loses their job, bam, within 24 hours, they're getting 30% credit cards marketed to them, and the drug dealer is at the door. Because it's relational database, it's cloud marketing. Okay, so I got a real look at how invasive the technology is. We have, every year we do a wrap-up, and then quarterly we do wrap-ups. Let me bring this up. And in the first quarter, we did one called Planet Debt, because I tried to identify all the debt in the world and who owned it, and it's really mysterious. You can find out how much debt governments have issued, but you can't find out who owns it. Very interesting. But one of the things we did was we created a game of life and showed how a family went from being prosperous to being completely harvested in the poorhouse. Okay? And here's the thing, it's a very complex story. Okay? Because when they can see everything you're doing, and they have access to all your financial information through the one-way mirror, then they can literally look for opportunities to market things to you, everything from consumer product to investment. Anyway, but I would encourage you to read The Game of Life. Okay, so I had a sense of how important the control or the entrainment was to these kinds of controls. So let me tell you what I know about it, but I would really encourage you to read that. And then I'm going to tell you this story because I think it helps to hear examples. My understanding from Adam is that the entrainment makes you feel good. One of the ways we know that something's true is because we resonate with it. And so it literally causes you to resonate. So it's an electronic mechanism that makes you artificially resonate. And that opens you up, and you're susceptible to subliminal programming. Everybody knows what subliminal programming is. We all know the story of Coke, right? Okay, so let me tell you the story of where I first experienced it in a conference setting. In 2004, 2005, I went to the big gold conference in New York. At the time, I was active in a group called GATA. Has anybody been to the gold conference? Okay, this was amazing. So there are 1,000 people in the ballroom, and it's 1,000 gold investors, essentially, pretty sophisticated crowd. And I'm walking in late. Dick Armey from the Congress is speaking, and after him, George Tenet, the former head of the CIA, who just retired, is speaking. So I walk into the ballroom, and it was interesting. I had just come from an experience of swimming with whales. Who here has ever swum with whales? Yeah, it's really a life-changing experience. It just, you just talk about resonating. You just, whoa. So I walk into the ballroom, and I open the doors. I was late, and I get hit with this wave of just overwhelming pleasure sensation, and it felt like a junk synthetic version of being with the whales. And I realized, oh my God, they're using entrainment technology. I had done a lot of work studying what happened in Enron, and my theory of the analyst presentations at Enron is they had used entrainment technology. So I walk in, and there are 1,000 people, and they're just in heaven. They're like, oh, he's so wonderful, and they're just taking notes. Oh, he's so wonderful. Everybody's feeling good. And there was an entrepreneur who I knew from GATA who was very grounded. He'd been very successful as a mechanic and building a mechanic business, and I thought, oh, good, I'm going to sit next to him. So I sat down, and I said, I've got to control my mind. I've got to control my mind. I'm taking notes. And I said, and at one point, I stopped and just wanted to get down the note I wanted to take. And so I stopped running sort of the monkey mind. I got to control my mind. I got to control my mind. And suddenly, everybody started clapping, and I put down my pen, and I started clapping, and I said, isn't he wonderful? And I said, no, he's not. What am I doing? So I literally lost control when I knew and realized this technology was working. Okay, so they get to the end of Dick Armey, and they start taking questions. And I realized, oh, my God, I can ask questions because they think they've got a rigged situation. So George Tenet gets up, and he gives a speech about the problem with 9/11 was that the different intelligence agencies were not coordinating, which is complete bunk, but it's the spin they were using to get new legislation passed. So he finishes, and I stand up, walk to the microphone. Everybody's like, oh, he's wonderful, he's wonderful. And I said, Mr. Tenet, my name is Catherine Austin Fitz. Of course, he knows who I am, so he froze. He's like, oh, shit. So I said, can you explain how the United States Air Force stood down 4 times on 9/11? And because that was the shortest, quickest unanswered question we had on the list, he froze. Now, in political speaking, I was taught to speak politically in campaigns. And in political speaking, when you get a question you don't want, you say, oh, sir, thank you so much for asking me that question. That is such a brilliant question. And yesterday, I was going to the grocery store, and I thought I wanted to tell you about this. So you do a complete non sequitur. but you're always kind to the person who asked the question. So apparently he did not have the training. He froze, he turned bright red, and he said, well, maybe you didn't notice, but I ran the CIA. You'll have to ask the Air Force. So talk about tighter coordination. Yeah, no, it was a very bureaucratic answer. And the crowd, it broke the trance. They were like, what's he afraid of? And it was very interesting because my bet is that the gold dealers got more purchases over the next 3 weeks after that because the trance got broken. But if those 1,000 people had known entrainment technology existed, I think it would have gotten broken a lot sooner. So you just need to know, the number one thing you can do to protect yourself is you just need to know that these systems are operating. And that's why, let's say you're talking to somebody about an investment and you're worried that you're getting too strong a sell. Maybe it's entrainment technology, maybe you just really like the person. Do the math. The reason I stick with the mathematics of time and money is over time they just don't lie. They really speak to reality and resource education. So just make sure that you don't make decisions just on simple resonation. You do the math. You really think it through. It's one of the reasons I encourage people to get together and, form essentially conspiracies to help each other, because I find that, I have very good discerning friends who it really helps to get a sort of a gut check from other people. Okay, but this technology is real, it exists. Now, what can you do to protect yourself against it? The simple way to protect yourself against it is to walk away from all digital systems whatsoever, which is extremely hard to do in the modern world, okay? If you can't do that, then what you need to do is you need to make sure you're on a media diet. So if you come to my house, the internet gets turned off when I'm not online and need to be online. I have no TV. The smartphone stays in the car. It doesn't even come into the house. So, and I still have an analog telephone line, and I have to fight hard to keep it. But one of the reasons is, I have a much higher degree of reliability and less trouble on that line than I do on the digital lines. So it's a matter of putting yourself on a strict digital system diet and just knowing that when you're picking this up and handling it, it may be that there are parties on the other side of that technology who do not have your best intention at heart. Now, I will tell you, when you do business in all aspects of your life with people who have your best intention at heart, it is amazing. So let me talk a little bit about banks. I was sitting in Washington in 1998 in the middle of the food fight with the US federal government, and I was writing a check on my JP Morgan Chase account, and I froze and I realized, why am I banking at the bank that's doing this? So I went through a process where in all aspects of my life, I tried to instead do business with people who really did want to help me succeed and really were not doing those things. It was very uncomfortable. It took a long time, but after a couple years, I literally woke up and everything felt wonderful. Now, my life is far less sophisticated than it used to be, because to limit your life to people you can trust, you have to cut out a lot of neatsy-keen things, okay? But you then get an energy that is very different. Caroline Casey used to talk about decorating your whole house with furniture made by people that you personally knew and what it would do to the energy. So I'm talking about attuning your energetics with your finances, okay? Okay, so when I talk about quality, what I mean is working with institutions that are very competent at what they do and they have your best interest at heart. Now, it's hard to always do that because for a custodian, you do want a custodian that's major in the system, okay? And that's one of the conundrums that we all face. Okay, so let me talk about new models. One of the challenges, there are many, many new models that work. And here's the problem. You have with the current system, whether it's big corporations or the Fed and the big banks, you have an aggregator. What they're trying to do is suck up as much into their stock or to suck up as much into their currency so they can compete globally. So if you're the people running the US position on the board, what you want to know is, how am I going to compete up against 1.4 billion Chinese, up against 1.3 billion Indians? How am I going to stay on top in a world that is like this, and where their per capita is rising and we're a smaller and smaller part of the pie? So what they're trying to do is aggregate everything. So what was the Trans-Pacific Partnership? One of the reasons you saw such a push for the Trans-Pacific Partnership is, if you look at the trading accounts of all of our different allies around the world, the portion relating to China and Asia is rising, 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 and China is becoming more important to them than we are. Okay? So the Trans-Pacific Partnership was an effort to sort of aggregate and lock them back in to our unipolar system while we could. Okay? But it's over time, demographics count, and it's going to be a real food fight. Okay? So no, not necessarily. The question was, do we have an insane credit bubble, and are they necessarily going to implode? I don't think necessarily. China has, and I go back to planet debt. What happened in 2008, coming into 2008, we had levered up the developed world with debt. And then when 2008 hit, we levered up the emerging markets with debt. And now the question, well, the idea was to keep the economy going. The question is, now that we've levered up the whole planet with debt, what happens next? Now, here's the magic secret I will tell you. And that is, if you integrate, let's think of a balance sheet. So in balance sheet, we're talking about the financial side of the balance sheet, but there's also the asset side of the balance sheet. The asset side of the balance sheet is manipulated by what technology is allowed in and what is not. Okay, so let me make it simple, and let's talk about a house. Let's say you have a house worth $500,000, and you put debt on it of $500,000, and then it drops in value to $250,000. Okay, that is sort of where the planet is sitting right now. But what if so there are two things you can do. You can write down the debt, or you can do something that increases the value of the house, right? You integrate that new technology and you so dramatically increase the value of the house, that's not a problem. Now, but let's talk politics, because debt in a model that's run by force is a control system. It's not a financial system. Most of the people I know talk about debt as though it's a financial system, and it's not. We're not in a market economy, and it's not a financial system. It's a control system. You issue lots of debt to a country. That's what we've done with dollars. And then the commodity prices come down, and you've got them over a barrel, and then they have to do what you say. Okay, that's how the system works. And the number one most important question about debt is what? No. Who owns it? What about if it's owned off planet? I don't know that. This is why the most important question you need to ask is our economy open or closed? Are we trading with each other on one planet, or are we trading beyond this planet? I don't know the answer. Well, hold on just a second. Now, here's what I want you to understand. There are two issues I have with every day I read the Wall Street Journal, and every week I read The Economist. And, they are chock full of great financial information with many respects, but there's only one problem. There are two huge material emissions in normal financial commentary, whether it's on the internet with Greg and Coast to Coast and all these great shows, or the mainstream, The Economist, the Wall Street Journal. They make two assumptions. One is they pretend the black budget doesn't exist, which is absurd, because we have a huge flow of money that's disappearing on the balance sheet. We have an official reality that's completely different than reality, rigged through the federal budget. The federal budget is so far outside of the laws related to the constitutional and financial management that it's absurd. And we're pretending that that's not happening, okay? So that's sort of disassociation number one. But the second disassociation is, I don't know who's flying around in those spaceships around the planet, okay? So maybe they're from here, maybe they're not. I have a subscriber who swears they're holograms and it's all, you know, a giant mind control. I don't know, it could be. But what I can tell you is it is completely relevant to the economy. I mean, if you just look at the UFO reports that Richard says are credible, that's $150 trillion of hardware. Where are the factories? You know, how do we get a piece of that action? Do you know, I'm being facetious, but you're talking about asset valuations which are humongous relative to our current economy. So it's very relevant to the stock market and the financial system and the debt. And so the question number two is it open or closed? Now, when you are working with financial systems, you know, whether it's your money or talking about the whole financial system, and you make assumptions or engage in conjecture, you need to make that explicit, okay? So if I say, okay, well, you know, I think we ought to do this because I'm assuming the market will do this for this reason, it's an assumption. I don't know. I'm not into, I'm not a prophet. Okay? So we have an entire financial system that is based on the assumption and all the commentary that we read and get that the system is closed and that we can pretend that the black budget doesn't exist. Okay? And that's complete yah-yah. Okay? So the question is, how do we start to look at the economy and integrate those pieces in? And that's part of what we try and do on the Solari Report, is integrate those pieces in. And it's a lot of stuff. Okay? So let me get to scenario planning, because the question for you is, how do you navigate this? Because what I'm telling you is, if we don't understand the governance system, if we don't understand if it's open or closed, then we have no way of understanding, you know, whether China has too much debt or not. Okay, so I'll give you a perfect example. I believe the reason we rebalanced the global economy is we made a decision at the highest levels to become a multiplanetary civilization. We couldn't do it without the Chinese and Indians, and we have an enormous vested interest in China being successful. It's a very tense relationship, but at the highest levels, we've made a bet and we are tied at the hip. If you want to understand our relationship with China, the number one best book is a book by Stephen Roche called Unbalanced. Fabulous book. Roche was an economist on Wall Street who warned everybody about what was coming. And so he got shipped to Asia and became a China expert, and now teaches at Yale. Okay, so we don't begin to have the basic pieces of knowledge we need to have reasonable expectations of what's going to happen in the future as it relates to our investment assets or life. Okay, so needless to say, we're in a very organic rock and roll culture. I'm a person who used to have 1 year, 5 year, and 10-year plans. Now I have a plan based on what I call Cs. Okay, so let me explain to you what a C is. There's an old joke. Our family farm was in New Hampshire, and so I spent my summers in New Hampshire. There's an old joke that a city slicker is driving down the road in New Hampshire. He sees a farmer. He stops, and he says, "I'm lost. Could you tell me how to get to town?" And the farmer says, "Oh, yeah, no, it's really easy. Go down the road 2 Cs, take a right, go 3 Cs, take a left, and you'll be in town." And he said, "Oh, well, thank you very much, but could you tell me what a C is?" And he said, "Yeah, a C is when you can see as far as you can see. That's 1 C." Okay, so now at Solari, we plan in Cs. You know, it's like, I'm only going to plan it out to this thing because by the time I get there, everything's going to have changed, so I might as well just then, so it's a much more organic process. I use scenario planning. If you look at the annual wrap-up, it has my scenario plans for 2016. And what I try when I work with people is tell them there is no right or wrong. No one knows what's going to happen next. If the top corporations can get surprised the way they've gotten surprised this last year, it can happen to anybody. So what we can do is we can predict the possible future scenarios, and we can assign probabilities to them. And in an ideal world, we can have a plan on how we're going to have a free and inspired life in all of them. Because that's my goal for you. You have a free and inspired life in all the scenarios. Okay? Now, what I find is we all spend a lot of time listening to people prophesy about what's going to happen and locking into a particular scenario who's right and who's wrong. It's a complete waste of time. You want to work your way. You want to be emotionally and mentally prepared for every scenario, including the worst case, because then you don't have to worry about it, okay? So I have a plan for the worst case, but I never worry about it because I don't think it's a big possibility, but it could happen. And so define the scenarios, work out plans to deal with every scenario, and what you'll come back to when it comes to your investment is what you want are quality and balance. Okay? So let's look at the investment areas. There's you, okay? It's not just stocks, commodities, fixed income, and cash. There's you. You should be at the center. So whether it's your health, your business, your skills, your knowledge, you need to be, when you look at your investments, you need to be investing in you. But then you look at all the other allocations, what you realize in these different scenarios, some could do well and some could do terribly. And the idea of balance is you're prepared for all of them. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Let's say the dollar loses in the reset. We have the U.S. have to come back to a much more self-sufficient lifestyle. We have to cut Social Security. We have to cut the budget dramatically. Things are going to be very tough, okay? And so U.S. stock market's going to get really hit hard. But what happens if we integrate all this technology? It's going to crash up. So the variability of what can happen in the future is very dramatic. And the number one issue of what happens is, what's the number one driver? Leadership. And if there's any reason we're feeling nervous, it's because of the leadership. Okay, wait a minute, whose question did I not get? Drugs, okay. Drugs have been a phenomenally efficient mechanism to build control, okay? The control point in the U.S. economy is controlling the currency and the federal budget. And it's a fabulous, it is from a financial standpoint, it is a financial mechanism that has produced untold wealth and privileges. It's quite phenomenal the way it's been designed. But to get control of the federal budget, what do you have to do? No, you have to control 3,100 counties, one at a time, okay? Because political control comes bottom up from place. So you've got to control the politics of one place at a time. Now, what you've seen is drugs used, not just in this country, but in many other countries, to come in and get control of places and do it in a way which is financially profitable. Because remember, the way the planet is run, nobody ever says, I want to take over that country. They say, I want to make money taking over that country. So, for example, I will tell you, I think 9/11 was the most profitable covert operation in the history of the planet. And I've made lists of all the different ways they made money, but they never do a job like that as an expense line. They do it as a profitable opportunity. Okay? So when you hear Richard talk about false flags, one of the issues is, okay, how do we design each false flag to maximize our profits? Okay, and there's enormous coordination between the financial markets and how you trade it and how you manage it, and the sort of the risk management. Okay, so I bring drugs into a community, and so I get cash from that community, and then I use that money to compromise the various politicians and sort of get control. And I do something else. I use that money to bring in my businesses. So let me give you an example. Let's say we have $1 million of income from 10 small businesses. We have a tiny community. It has 10 small businesses, and we have $1 million of income. What is the equity valuation of those businesses if they have $1 million income? It's probably about 5 times, so maybe it's $5 million, okay? But let's say I have a big box store or franchise that's trading at 10 or 20. If I bring my big box store and my franchise in, and I get that $1 million, I can turn it into 20 million. You guys, you local guys, can only turn it into 5 million, right? Right, so I bring drugs in, I get the cash, I finance bringing my franchises in, and I get an infinite rate of return because I've now gotten this huge pop on the capital gains. You know, and not only that, I've made it easy to take the market share away because you're so busy trying to get your kid out of jail, because he's been taking drugs. Okay, so it's a takeover model, and it helps finance a leveraged buyout of a place, and it's been phenomenally successful. If you drive around America and you see how much money is being taken out of communities with drugs, it's unbelievable. And what's interesting now is if you talk to people about why they buy the illegal drugs, what you discover is the pricing is very much attuned with pharmaceuticals and the healthcare insurance, because most people taking those drugs are using them as painkillers, and they're buying them illegally because it's cheaper than buying the pharmaceuticals. But the pharmaceuticals are coming in hot and heavy as well. So the drug business has really been a way of affecting control, and it's been phenomenally efficient. And now that control has been completed, if you look at the war on drugs was the platform upon which they then built the war on terrorism, because the war on drugs was wearing thin and they needed a new game. So it switched the war on terrorism. If you want to understand the nuts and bolts of how this works, there's a wonderful book by Michael Woody was called American Power and Organized Crime, or Organized Crime, American Power. He's an academician from the UK, and he studied about how they built the different laws on the war on drugs that were used to control, and then took it up and literally through the UN transferred it to countries all around the world. Michael Woody was. Excellent, excellent book. Woody was. Okay. It's WOODIWISS, I think. Woody was, I think. It's American Power and Organized Crime. You can, it's on the internet. You can pick it up at all the bookstores. Okay. So let's get back to the new models. The challenge with the new model is you have the top guys aggregating. They're trying to get, for every dollar they get going through their stock goes up $20. Okay, so you pull $1 from their stock and they lose $20. And that's before the leverage of debt and derivatives, they lose even more. So the sensitivity on keeping things within the centralized mechanisms is enormous. And what happens is there are thousands of great local models. Local currencies can work, time banks work, all these things work. The problem is, if the aggregators notice, then you've got an enormous COINTELPRO kind of problem. Because the speed, the biggest job program in America is basically managing the population and social engineering. And you would not believe what, I used to just be amazed when I was doing the litigation, because I thought, how can they afford to spend this much money manipulating me? It's just, I couldn't believe it was happening, because I couldn't believe anybody. When I finished the process, it was 11 years, I calculated the American government had spent $45 million. And I couldn't figure out, I said, why not just kill me? I mean, it's not economic. And then I started to realize, I have an online book where I talk about this. It's called Dillon, Read and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. What I realized was that if you have an entire financial system where $1 of profit in a stock can generate $20 of equity valuations, that can only happen if the population believes in the rule of law. Because you have to trust the system. You have to be willing to put your money in Fidelity or Schwab and let it stay in the stock market. And you have to believe that your property rights will be respected. Because if you don't, then the only multiple you can get from $1 of income is another, it's 1-1. So it's very interesting. If you look at the competition between illegal money and legal money in the economy, why is legal money more powerful? Organized crime has a much higher margin, but they can't turn $1 into $20. which is why it's been so important to take that high margin cash flow, run it through corporations that are trading at $20. Okay? But the rule of law is important. So a fortune is spent on pretending that the rule of law really exists, because you need that financial leverage. It was interesting when I moved to rural Tennessee in the middle of the litigation, and I was driving back and forth to Washington, and there was one franchise that had a very high multiple. And I would drive by about 20 of them. There was one in the town near where I live, and then I would drive about 20 on the way to Washington. I would stay in Philadelphia. There was one in Philadelphia, and then I'd drive back. And after a year, I had never seen a customer in that franchise, except for the one in Philadelphia, which was doing a real business. They were going gangbusters. But they were empty. So I started to make it my business to go in and talk to the staff and find a little bit out about their, is my time up? No. Oh, good. So how much time do we have? So I would talk to them about their business, and what I realized was, they were sucking up about $100,000 a year of overhead, and they didn't have revenues. So there was one in the town where I lived, and I didn't see a customer in it for a year. And then one day, I was driving by and I saw a customer, and I said, I wonder if that's a Bolo doll. And I stopped the car and I went in just to see if it was a real customer. Okay, so how was that working? They're laundering money. If you ever read, there's a great book called Black Money by Michael Thomas. It's about the Promise software situation, but he describes how we had created an infrastructure of thousands of franchises and retail shops that could launder enormous amounts of money during the 70s and 80s. And so, and I won't say the name of that franchise, but I bet a lot of you owned the stock. The system is, there really is a matrix. It is remarkable. If you have a house with TVs watching you, and a smartphone watching and listening to you, and email and a smartphone communicating everything, and it's all being monitored by artificial intelligence and relational databases that are then figuring out what to market to you, how to market to you, whether it's a consumer product, an investment, or the campaign. I mean, we are watching, Planet Entrainment campaign right now. And the power they have to change people's minds is phenomenal. So, there is a matrix. It's very real. Now, what's amazing is there's a certain percentage of people who seem to be immune. I don't know. There are, and this. I saw this when I worked in the administration. I had a very strange experience working in the Bush administration, but we had a secretary who would literally have sort of manic episodes. And everybody would kind of go crazy with him, but there were three of us, two of them were lawyers and then me, and we were completely immune. And we could never understand, why are all these people, going crazy together? And so we could never understand it, but what I will tell you is, what you want to do is you want to find those people around you, and really use them to create. You're trying to create an alternative field. Okay, so does everybody know what I mean by morphogenic field? Okay, so these are field wars, because what they're trying to do, is to intersect your resonation with other living things, whether it's people or trees or animals, and instead have you resonate into their machine. Okay? So the question is, how can you protect your field, and how can you build a field with other people which keeps that out? Occasionally you'll see me walk out of the house and just go put my arms around a tree. It's like I'm trying to come back. Okay, we've got a question here.
Yeah, are you talking about electromagnetic frequencies that they're being used in us? I'm not sure I'm clear with all this.
Here's if you want to understand the science, I would really encourage you to listen to that Solari Report or scientists who talk about this. Blake Levitt is another scientist who's done a lot on cellular stuff. There are a lot of scientists who talk about it, and I'm really not qualified. But I believe, yes, they're manipulating our electromagnetic field. Pardon me? Yeah, Rupert Sheldrake. It was very interesting. When I was in the 90s, I was building relational database and software tools to let you see how the money worked within your community. And I was able to take the federal budget and break it down by place and learn a lot, do a lot of simulation about the economy in a place. And one of the things I discovered was that all the stuff I've been taught at Wharton Business School about how economies work did not explain what I was watching. The thing that explained what I was watching was morphogenic fields. Rupert Sheldrake helped me a lot more understand the economy bottom up, because people optimize around what they know and what they love to do. So if you build an economy where everybody knows, and this is a real problem, everybody knows how to pump and dump the mortgage market, and they love doing it. The problem is they keep doing it. One of our biggest problems globally, and this was one of the top stories in the wrap-up this year, is we have now, over the last 20 years, financed and built an extraordinary number of private armies and intelligence agencies. We've created a whole world of mercenaries. And what they know how to do is be mercenaries. You know, so do you know what the new business program of mercenaries looks like? You start a war. And that was why the Peace of Westphalia in the 1600s ended the mercenary armies, because, you know, the whole society was being destroyed by mercenaries who were who were creating wars so that they would have something to do. Wait a minute, we need to talk into the microphone. Let me just check and see if there's one. So we want to talk about the Fed as well, and crash or correction.
You said this is a central banking and force model that is undergirding the economy. Isn't it not only in our best interest, but a matter of integrity to divest from that system as quickly as possible?
Here's the thing, there is no way. I think there's a great deal you can do, and there's a great deal certainly in my life I've done to try and make sure that my money is going into things that, you know, give life. Okay? So there are plenty of companies. You know, one of the most inspiring things that I've ever done is, over the last 3 years, due diligence to a lot of companies being, you know, relatively young companies all over the world. And what you realize very quietly is there are thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs starting companies, having access to the stock market, and doing fantastic things. It's one of the most powerful forces for good on the planet. It's not one we hear about a lot, but it's there. So I'm a great believer. The stock market and the financial markets are a mixed bag. There's a lot of good stuff going on in them. There's a lot of bad stuff going on them. And so I try and be very careful about sticking with the good, but I'm not prepared to go off and live in the mountains, you know, and provide my own energy and grow my own food. You know, that's a miserable existence. I've kind of tried a modified version. It doesn't work. So I'm not prepared to leave society. But what I have found is, if in everything we do, from the allocation of our time and money to our business, I mean, make no mistake about it, forget the corrupt elites. All of the things happening in this country which are terrible are being done by you and me. Okay? It was millions of Americans who pumped and dumped the housing market. I went around in the 90s and tried to warn everybody. Nobody wanted to hear it. In fact, they wanted me to shut up. It was like, we hate you. We don't want to hear this. Nobody likes the mirror. So I'm going to tell the red button story. Who here has heard the red button story? Okay, so I apologize. I'm going to tell it again. Because this corruption is deep. And that's what we have to face. It's not just the elites. It's us, too. So I'm not saying that you have not in your life tried to be a highly ethical, giving person. But I will tell you, there is a serious debasement in the general population. So in the summer of 2001, about then, I was giving a speech to a wonderful group called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation International. And they have a conference once a year to discuss how they can help our society evolve spiritually. And I was asked to give a speech that later became a very famous article called Narco Dollars for Beginners that describes our financial dependency on narcotics trafficking. And I was in the middle of the speech, and I was describing that the Department of Justice spokesperson had just told a reporter I was working with during the congressional hearings related to the Dark Alliance allegations of U.S. intelligence agencies dealing drugs into South Central L.A. The Department of Justice spokesperson had said that the U.S. economy launders $500 billion to $1 trillion a year of all illegal money. So I said to this wonderful audience, what would happen if we stopped laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion? Today it's much more. And they said, well, you know, the money would leave the New York Stock Exchange and go to Switzerland and London and Hong Kong, and, you know, our stocks would go down, and, you know, and the government would have trouble financing the deficit, and so on and so forth. Because remember, it's not just a $500 billion to $1 trillion a year, it's the accumulated capital from the last 100 years. Okay? So, and if you do, I've done the math, if you do the math, basically you end up owning everything. So I said to this wonderful group of spiritually evolved people, let's pretend if you push a red button up here on the lectern, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking in your state, your county, your city, your community tomorrow. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, guess how many would push the button? 1. So I said to the other 99, why would you not push the button? And they said, we don't want our IRAs and 401ks to go down. We don't want our government checks to stop. And we don't want our taxes to go up. So I said, so what you're saying is you want whomever to market drugs to your neighbor's children to keep your stocks up. Now, here's what I discovered that day. What I discovered that day is they didn't want to push the red button because they didn't know how to go into the invention room and have an honest conversation about how to turn the red button green. Because the question we need to ask is not how do I push the red button? The question we need to ask is how do I make money pushing the red button? That's why I say turning it green. Because in fact, you can't make money by liquidating and destroying all the human capital in society. Now, there's no doubt about it. I can make more money on, you know, having 3 kids deal drugs and launder it through my franchise restaurant than I can spending 20 years, you know, educating them properly and turning them into great engineers who can take us into space. That's hard work. Anybody who's raised a child knows that. You know, but ultimately you liquidate your society. So in the long run, it doesn't work. But you have to understand, if you're the president of the United States, you're in a very centralized model. You walk in the first day. So Obama walked into office the first day, and his political guy said, okay, everybody got you elected. They spent $1 billion overtly. They spent more covertly getting you elected. Now they all want their check. They want their community block development grant. They want their HUD subsidy. They want their Social Security check. They want a new contract. They're a defense contractor. They all want their money. So you turn to the Secretary of State and you say, okay, how do I get the money? And he says, you got to make nice to the people who control $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. And he has to do it. You know why he has to do it? Because you don't want him to push the red button. The general population does not want him. So how does he push the red button if the general population? You need an 80% plus consensus of the American people to effect a change in a highly centralized model in Washington. If 90% of the people won't push the red button, you can't do it. Okay? Now, we're coming into a re-engineering of the federal budget after the election in 2017, and that's the opportunity, particularly for the small business in a place. If you're on the Rotary or Chamber of Commerce or something, the real opportunity is to get the data on the sources and uses of federal money in your place and say, okay, how can we turn the red button green? Because if you can, there's a fantastic opportunity. And now that they've stolen all the money, maybe the politics will come back around that. Okay, now. About there being an opportunity? So if you're in the Rotary or the Chamber, the opportunity is to look at the sources and uses of federal money in your place, you know, build your literacy about how that money works, and look for opportunities to bottom up to argue for changes. So, for example, where are we spending $25 per hour to do something with a big federal contract that you could do, you could have labor doing for $10 or $15 in your community? And there are thousands and thousands of examples of that, but it takes time. You have to drill in, you have to get to see the cash flows, you have to figure out what contracts apply. It's quite a knowledge management feat, and that's why we were making Community Wizard. But the opportunities are there.
Is that your software?
It was my software. The Department of Justice seized our offices, stole the software, kept it under lock and key for 6 years, and then when I finally got it out, the most valuable pieces had been completely stolen for good. The company that they had as the knowledge manager on all of our files and software was the same company that is the leading marketer of GIS software to the federal government, but also the company that led the Abu Ghraib situation. So they're quite something. Anyway, so I took what I had left when I finally got it out of court control. And of course, at that point, it was all on legacy software. And I took it to the Internet Archive, the Free Software Foundation, and one other person. And everybody basically said, it's too hot to handle. We don't want to touch it. So.
There seems to be some kind of unwritten rule where if the actual population of people at some level, you said 80 to 90%, agrees with something, that the overall structure cannot go against it. I don't know if you can talk to this.
Okay. So the way I got the 80% number is, when I worked in politics, you were trained. You can't make a big change without 80%. It was common lore within the political group. Now I believe you don't need 80 or 90% in many systems, but when you look at the financial engineering and how locked in you are to the financial engineering, it doesn't surprise me that it's 80. It would be 80 to 90%. Now, what is the number one tactic that they use the entrainment for? Divide and conquer. And why did they use divide and conquer? So you don't get an 80 to 90. Remember, a lot of the focus is on what divides us, not what unifies us, okay? And so, wait, no. So it's on what divides us, not what unifies us. And that's because they want to keep people apart. And that's why it's so unbelievably important in your family, in your life, in your local community, that you rebuild those linkages. And the number one most important is men and women giving each other energy, and then different generations giving each other energy. And that's why families and building family wealth are so important. The number one wealth building unit in this country until very recently was the family. And I have another Solari report called Building Family, it's on family wealth and building family wealth. And part of what you want to look at if you go into the Rotary and get the numbers and start working on this is how do we rebuild family wealth? Who are the families here who have businesses, who are doing things? How do we help them succeed? It's a very incremental process. Sorry, could somebody take her microphone?
Catherine, one question here. Here I am.
Who's talking? Okay.
So lots of difficult things happening in the world. You're describing them well, but for a group of people, switching from fear into creativity is really a huge opportunity right now. How do we switch in the face of all that's going on you're talking about? How do we move from coming from fear into coming from creativity?
Well, I find everybody's different, so I have a hard time looking at an audience of many people and saying, here's how you do it. I think one of the things you have to do is you have to turn off all the fear. So I find there's a real addiction to fear porn, and you just have to turn it off. It's funny, one of my favorite preachers, the thing that helped me the most, believe it or not, I'm a Christian, and the thing that helped me most was I studied very seriously. When one day I realized, I looked in the mirror and I said, if this keeps going the way it's going, I'm going to die. I'm not going to make it. And I had grown up in an African-American neighborhood. And I was essentially raised by an African-American woman who worked for my family. And so I knew that they knew. It was a population that had been targeted by genocide for many centuries, and they knew how to deal with what I was dealing with. So I went to a black church in Washington, and I took several years of courses in spiritual warfare. And frankly, I believe, I said last night, I think the most powerful forces on the planet are spiritual. And I've had many sort of interdimensional or spiritual experiences that's persuaded me that that's where the power ultimately lies. And so what really saved my life and made it much easier for me to do what I do is spiritual warfare. And if I wasn't trained in spiritual warfare, I have no idea how I would deal with any of this. But I am loath to tell somebody else, to find a great black church and study spiritual. That may not be your pathway. I also do Yuan Gong, which I feel is very important because they're stripping you down your electromagnetic power, so to speak, and anything you can do to build it up, build up your chi, rebuilds, and then stay away from things that strip it down. So I think, I hate to say it this way because I don't like to think with this mentality, but there are two stories I will tell. I was down in Texas at the Secret Space Program Conference, and I ran into a guy I know by email, but I've never met him in person, and he said, he's a big guy, real tall, and he looked like he weighed about 200 pounds, and he said, I just lost 400 pounds. I said, holy cow, how'd you do that? And he looked at me with this twinkle in his eye, and he said, visualization. So someone was talking about it yesterday. I think it was Kimberly or Foster. But you have to have a picture of your future, even if it's only for 1C, which is attractive to you. You need to be, this is all about being attracted into the future. Because at the root, the war we're having is are these guys going to be able to use all these tools to invent our life, or are we going to invent our own life? Okay.
Catherine?
Now, wait a minute. So the second thing is, 5 minutes. I end every Solari report, and I always say, don't worry about whether there is a conspiracy. If you're not in a conspiracy, you need to start one.
Yeah.
No, don't laugh. So the reason that I say this is my entire life, and you have to understand where I came from, sort of secret societies and all that kind of stuff. Conspiracies were the basic organizing principle of how the world got created. There was nothing wrong with conspiracies. They were good things, They didn't have to be illegal, but conspiracies were how we got things done. I'll never forget, there were millions of them. I would sit in my office, and a guy who was at the top of a major corporation, I won't embarrass him by saying, he calls me and he says, these guys are getting together and they're doing this thing and it's really bad. Let's just fuck them up. And so we made a couple calls, and it was kind of a war over what was going to happen civically in New York City, and we won, it was dangerous because if those guys figured out who was doing it, we have a real food fight on our hands. But, conspiracies were how you functioned. They were my world. And everyone was great at them, and they were fun, and we loved it. And then I started Hamilton Securities in Washington, and I discovered you had a whole population of people who didn't know how to do a conspiracy. They had no training in conspiracies. They didn't think that way. They were just waiting for somebody to invent their world. And I would have people say to me, well, you can't do that. I said, I can do anything. We don't know how to do it, but let's invent it. Let's figure out the smart guys. Let's get them. Let's invent it. We have been trained to be passive. So part of this is how do you find people that you can trust, particularly with the entrainment, in the entrainment environment, and start to work with them in your life in a way which is fun for you. You have to enjoy this. That lowers your expenses, increases your income, lowers your risk. Very practical nuts and bolts things. I can't believe I have to talk about this because if you look at the immigrants coming in from all the other countries, that's what they're doing. Do you know what a hand or partnership is? It's a savings group. They get together, 10 people, they agree, $100 a week. Everybody comes in, they throw $100 in, one person takes the whole hand. And meantime, they counsel each other on their money problems and what they need. And it's a conspiracy, and they're there to help each other succeed and watch each other's back. Okay, so I have to tell you the isolation is really bad. How can you form a group? It could be a food club. It could be going down, one guy goes down to the terminal markets, buys fresh food, brings it back, and you lower your food costs. But you've got to start conspiring because it's the only way, we're going to see our way through that. So one person here had a question. I just want to do that one.
With our children and with what's happening with entrainment, and everybody here has been grown up in a society where we know about 9/11 and all these things that have been done. All our children are on their iPhones, they're on their computers, they're gaming, all these things are being done. How do we begin to protect the next generations, because they are the ones that don't have our knowledge, our experience with all the conspiracies? They don't even believe it. They
Right.
watch The Matrix, but they don't believe it. How do we begin to help? How do we begin to show? How do we take care of these?
So I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna tell you some really bad news. You've got to get them on a digital diet, or there's no hope.
Beside that, they're still
Okay.
getting it so many other ways.
I know. Then you may have to move. I live in a place where you can put a kid on a digital diet, and they spend a lot of time outdoors. You've got to get them out in nature, away from the digital systems. Even if it's only for vacations, even if it's only when there's a school holiday, you've got to get them out into nature, away from that stuff, so that they spend enough time out of the trance so that they know it exists. Another thing you've got to do is you've got to take them around the world.
Right.
Okay? Because they have to see there's something other than this bubble. There's other bubbles and there's other worlds. There's one other thing I'm going to tell you, because I just finished writing a foreword. Dr. Joseph Farrell is coming out with a great book with a co-author this year on Common Core, and I wrote the foreword. And here's what I said. You cannot leave your kids in public school.
Agreed.
It's over. You cannot leave them. They're not safe.
Agreed.
So, and I did a Solari report on Common Core. You're talking about putting kids on systems that are 24/7 online, and everything they do or say is being recorded and going into what I call the data beast, and it's being used to manipulate them, and it's going. They're designing a system that when it finishes rolling out, there will be no teachers or principals or doctors between your child and that corporation or that intelligence agency. So you are talking about giving 24/7 digital access to people who have a record of not being trustworthy with our children. You cannot do that. You cannot do that. So unfortunately, I know that's a huge inconvenience. But until you can get enough people in a community to just literally revolt about this and the related property taxes, if you put your children into that system, they are in serious physical, mental, emotional danger. Okay? Okay, I think that's it. That's it.